Hello New World, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm diving into something that's often talked about in the community but never really fully explained. The basics of New World gameplay. Terms like Empower, Rend, Weaken, and Dots are thrown around a lot, but do you really understand what they mean? What limits or caps do these status effects have, and how do they affect your game? Well, the game doesn't always teach you these concepts, and that's where I come in. I'm going to break it all down for you so you can understand exactly how these mechanics work. Before we dive in, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest supporters, Dante and Ramona. It's amazing to see you both having fun in the Ayoub raiding community. Keep up the awesome work. And of course, a big thank you to my sponsor for today's video, AYOUBgaming. Yes, that's right, I'm sponsoring my own video. And I've got some exciting resources to share with you. Throughout this video, I'll be using spreadsheets I've worked hard on. These spreadsheets contain every buff and debuff in the game, complete with detailed effects, descriptions, and links to the New World database for more info. Not only that, but I've added a calculator for every effect so you can easily track the caps of your builds. You can also rearrange the table using Google Spreadsheets view option. These spreadsheets are a game changer when it comes to team compositions, especially for things like mutations, Gorgon, and worm content. On top of that, I've made a special spreadsheet that details the composition we use for the worm raid in the Ayoub community. The best part? These sheets are publicly available on our Discord, so anyone can access them and use them to optimize their gameplay. And for those asking, we are currently hosting worm raids on Nisa, Draco, and Ares, so if you're playing on any of these servers, don't hesitate to join. All players are welcome and we'd love to have you with us. Now let's start with base damage, empower, and weaken. Base damage percentage is added to your weapon or ability's raw damage, while Empower acts as a multiplier of that base damage. Some tooltips in the game will tell you exactly which is which, but others won't. So how can you know for sure? Well, unfortunately, you can't in-game, which is why I've created these helpful sheets. Now there's an important distinction. Base damage has no limits, but Empower has a cap at 50%. What does that mean? Well, the cap is essentially the maximum boost you can get from Empower. Any Empower value above 50% is wasted, so if you have 70% Empower, you're only benefiting from the 50%. But wait, then Weaken comes into play. Weaken reduces your damage output and counts against your Empower. For example, if you have 40% Empower and get weakened by 10%, your Empower is effectively reduced to 30%. This mechanic is especially useful to understand in PvP, particularly in OPRs where weaken abilities are thrown around constantly. Some players stack rune glasses and harnessing to go above the Empower cap, ensuring that when they get weakened, their damage isn't affected too much. Next up, let's talk about Rend, Fortify, and Absorption. Fortify boosts your physical and elemental armor, essentially adding to your base armor ratings and improving your overall defenses. While Fortify is a good defensive buff, it's not as effective as Absorption, which is a specialized defense that reduces the damage you take from specific damage types. Absorption is much stronger, and that's why Fortify is capped at 200%, while Absorption is capped at 50%. Again, the game doesn't always tell you which counts towards what, but luckily these sheets have all the details you need. Now let's talk about Rend. Rend reduces armor and counters Fortify, making it extremely valuable in combat. Rend is capped at 70%, which means any additional armor you gain from Fortification is reduced by Rend. Why do all these buffs and debuffs matter? Well, if you're playing PvE, there are three main things you should focus on in any group composition. Maintain Empower to boost your damage, apply the maximum possible Rend to reduce the enemy's armor and increase the damage they take, weaken the enemies to reduce their damage output, which helps you survive longer. Why is it important? Well, if the mob's damage is reduced, you can survive more easily. This means you can afford to focus more on damage and have less constitution, which in return increases your overall damage output. What about resilience? In some game modes, enemies have resilience that reduces the effectiveness of your debuffs. For instance, in the Worm Raid, the boss has 50% resilience against Rend. So your Rend is only 50% as effective as usual. This means that an ability like Armor Breaker, which usually applies 30% Rend, would only apply 15% to this boss. To hit the cap of 70%, you would need to apply 140 Rend to compensate for the resilience. Unclamped boosts are another thing to keep in mind. These do not count towards your Empower cap. For example, if you have 50% Empower and use a Beast coating, you will get an additional 15% damage against beasts. So you will get the full 50% Empower plus the 15 extra damage against them. Now let's talk about Disease. Disease reduces your healing efficiency both outgoing, which are the heals that you give to others, and incoming, which are the heals that you receive. Disease caps at 50% for each, so it's an important factor to consider in both PvE and PvP situations, especially when facing healing opponents. Haste and Slow are next. Haste increases your movement speed, while Slow reduces it. Movement speed is crucial in PvP. Many abilities rely on increasing your speed, turning combat into a game of chase rather than actual fight. That's why Slow is such a valuable tool to control your opponent's movements. With the current state of the game, it's almost essential to have speed buffs on you and some abilities that slow down your enemies, especially if you're playing an offensive or chasing role. On the flip side, if you're in a defensive group, you'll want to stack haste to keep up with the enemy and play the kite game. Finally, let's talk about Energize and Exhaust. These buffs and debuffs affect your stamina regeneration. Dodging consumes stamina, and the faster your stamina recharges, the faster you can dodge again. The slower your enemy's stamina regenerates, the harder it will be for them to dodge. Not many abilities focus on these two effects, but they're still useful to keep in mind, especially in longer fights. And that wraps up today's video. I hope this helped clear up some of the confusion around the mechanics of base damage, empower, weaken, and all the other buffs and debuffs in New World. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. And as always, let me know in the comments what you'd like to see covered in the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. IchBinAyoub.